Good morning, everyone, and special good morning to anybody who's watching on the streaming. Glad you could find us. And also a special thank you to Cindy Irvine, who volunteered to come and figure out the streaming process for us this morning. So the plan for today is partially based on the input that we got 3 months ago. And the purpose of this offering is to try to create opportunities for community and support, learning and inquiry for people who are engaged in Nundro and the Mahamudra program practices while we're awaiting the return of the North American program. And so my plan for today is to start with a prepared teaching on the Mahamudra lineage of practitioners. And then last time people said they really wanted the opportunity to practice together. And so we'll do that. And then we'll have a break from about 10:15 to 10:30, depending on how long the practice goes. And then from 10:30 to 12 is our opportunity to have a discussion about practice and questions and answers as well, if that's helpful. But to start, why don't we just take a few moments to settle and perhaps reflect on why we're here today. So in preparing comments about the lineage, well, there's nothing quite like hearing about the lineage from the lineage. When you get to hear the Tibetans talk about the lineage, it really seems like a special treat. And so I took the liberty of transcribing some comments from the Venerable Trungpa Rinpoche. That I'll share with you. So Rinpoche says that in Vajrayana traditions, it's very important to have a proper, continuous stream, unbroken transmission from masters to disciples, right from Buddha Vajradhara, Dorje Chang, or the Sambhogakaya form of Buddha Shakyamuni, till the present day lineage holder. And Rinpoche says the meaning of Kagyu is explained by its component words. Ka means words of the Buddha, oral transmission of the Sutra, Shastra, and Tantra. And Gyu means lineage, master-disciple connections. So we are the oral transmission lineage. And he says the Kagyu order places the utmost importance on lineage. Shakyamuni Buddha passed into parinirvana 2,500 years ago, 2,600 years ago, and we're not able to receive teachings directly from him. But in the Kagyu order, we have a continuous, unbroken oral transmission that consists of the Buddha's words. And he said this is not any oral transmission, but a transmission taught, practiced, and handed down by individual lineage holders from whom the profound Buddha wisdom arises. In short, he says, we can say that the lineage holders are no different from the Shakyamuni Buddha himself. And he goes on to say that if oral transmission is given by ordinary persons without a lineage, then the transmission will contain flaws and errors, giving rise to false teachings that will further confuse all sentient beings. So no pressure for me. Therefore, it is extremely important to have and to uphold an unbroken lineage in the propagation and practice of the Dharma. And since Trungpa Rinpoche is a great being, he knows how Western minds work. He then preemptively addresses what might be our doubts. And he says, sometimes one doubts that the master-to-disciple transmission could be flawless. One may argue that flaws could arise in a transmission from a non-realized master to his disciple. If there could be flaws, then the contents of the transmission may degenerate as the transmission comes down further. Rinpoche disputed this argument. He says, it's not true. He stressed that the words of Shakyamuni Buddha as transmitted since the olden days in the Kagyu lineage has been continuous, unbroken, and unchanged till today. And therefore one should dispel such negative notions and doubts in the Karma Kagyu lineage, which has its source in Shakyamuni Buddha. And the lineage of Mahamudra practitioners can be found in the lineage prayer in the Guru Yoga text. And it's slightly different at the top of the lineage prayer at the beginning if you compare it to the prayer in our Chinrezi text. And the difference reflects Marpa's having had two main gurus. And so the lineage prayer in the Guru Yoga text acknowledges the lineage of Maitripa, whereas the prayer in the Chinrezi text acknowledges the lineage of Naropa. But then once you get to Marpa, then both prayers are the same. And I thought the lineage is relevant to the practice of refuge and prostrations because you start by visualizing the refuge tree, which has in the center part of the tree the Mahamudra lineage of practitioners. And many of the figures that you could visualize in the central branch could be these same teachers. And for me, it's not been possible to visualize each and every one of them, nor to really memorize the refuge tree, Tanka. But I don't think that's what this practice is about. It's not a practice of memorization. It's more, as Lama Michael says, the point is to develop confidence that even if it's not crystal clear in your mind's eye, that what you're visualizing is 100% there. Not solid, but nevertheless clearly visible and present, like a rainbow. And beyond the practice, doing the practice itself, well, what I found is once I started doing the practice, then other experiences started to act synergistically to help me in developing that confidence. In particular, being able to meet some of the people affiliated with the lineage, or some of the lineage holders, like His Holiness the 17th Karmapa. But also listening to recordings of them, or watching video recordings about their lives, and hearing stories about them in their lives. And then I've also found it to be very powerful to visit not just Buddha's holy sites, but really any holy site. I seem to find them all to be very meaningful and moving experiences. And then on the table out front, you'll find a document that Diane shared with us from her center in Colorado. And it's got kind of a brief, meaning about 20 pages, introduction to the lineage, and contains some really nice pearls and stories. And I thought I'd share some of them. So it notes, it describes Nagarjuna, and notes that his primary contribution to Buddhist philosophy is the development of the concept of shunyata, or emptiness, which brings together the Buddhist doctrines of no self and dependent origination. And it mentions in the paragraph on Marpa that in addition to Milarepa, he had three other well-known students. Choku Dorje was a master of explaining the Tantras. Tsirtan Wangi Dorje mastered Pala, which is the transmission of consciousness. And Meitun Chimpo, who mastered the practice of Uso, or luminosity. It also tells a story about, well, you often hear that Milarepa did bad things when he was young. So this gets more specific. It says that his father died and his family's estate passed into the hands of his father's brother, his uncle, who virtually enslaved Milarepa and his mother, forcing them to work in the fields. And so at his mother's request, when Mila grew up, he studied black magic and used a spell to kill 37 people, including his uncle and his uncle's family, and destroy most of the village's crops. So the most accomplished yogi in Tibet is also a mass murderer. And I thought I might read the commentary on Dejin Shekpa, because I thought it was really touching. Dejin Shekpa is the fifth Karmapa, born in the Myeongdong region of southern Tibet to Yogin parents. During the pregnancy, they heard the recitation of the Sanskrit alphabet and Om Ham mantras. Soon after birth, the infant sat upright, wiped his face, and said, "I am the Karmapa. O Mani Padme Hum free." When the child was brought to Tsawapu in Kongpo, Kacho Wangpo, who was the previous lineage holder, immediately recognized him as the incarnation of Rilpe Dorje, who was the previous Karmapa, and presented him with the black crown and other possessions of the fourth Karmapa. He went on to give the Karmapa the full cycle of Kagyu teachings, and the Karmapa soon completed his traditional training. So the Chinese emperor, Yongle, had a vision of the Karmapa as Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, and so invited Dejin Shekpa, this actually says Rilpe Dorje. So he may have invited the previous Karmapa, but anyway, at the age of 23, Dejin Shekpa, who was the current Karmapa, started on a 3-year journey to reach the imperial palace in China. And the Chinese emperor was an extraordinarily devoted student of the Karmapa, whom he took as his guru. And Chinese records speak of the Karmapa's manifestation in response to such devotion as 100 days of miracles. The emperor recorded these events for posterity in silk paintings with a multilingual commentary. Following in the footsteps of the 2 previous Karmapas, Dejin Shekpa subsequently made a pilgrimage to the famous Wu Tai Shan sacred mountains to visit his monasteries there. The emperor achieved some realization and had a vision in which he saw the wisdom Vajra crown above the Karmapa's head, so that all beings might benefit from seeing something of this transcendent aspect of the Karmapa. The emperor commissioned the creation of a physical replica of the wisdom Vajra crown, which he saw as a black hat. He presented it to his guru, requesting him to liberate those who saw it by wearing the crown on special occasions. And this was the beginning of the Vajra crown ceremony. The emperor also offered Karmapa the highest ranking title, Ta Bao Fa Wang, which means Great Precious Dharma King, with a golden seal. In 1410, Dejin Shekpa returned to Serpu to oversee the reconstruction of Serpu, which had been damaged by an earthquake. He recognized the Shamar reincarnation of Triple Yeshe and spent 3 years in contemplative retreat. The next lineage holder, however, was the Karmapa student, Ratnabhadra. Realizing that he would die at a young age, he left indications of his future rebirth and passed away into parinirvana at the age of 31. In the ashes of his cremation fire were found relics, naturally formed images of many Buddhas. In in comments about Refuge and Prostrations, Trungpa Rinpoche says that the function of the Nundro practices, or one of the functions, is to help us develop diligence. And he says, in the time of Milarepa, this wasn't necessary. People had this naturally. But nowadays it was helpful for students to do the Nundro practices as a way of developing diligence, like what Milarepa had. And that made me think of this comic book, which is, it's an illustrated Magic Life of Milarepa, Tibet's Great Yogi by Eva van Daan. So she made Milarepa's life into a graphic novel. And one of the things that I think she does really well is tell the story of the trials that Milarepa was put through before he was actually given teachings by his guru Marpa. And I'll see if I can do it justice. It's not exactly designed to be read, but I'll see if I can turn it into more of a story format. So when Milarepa sought out Marpa, who he'd heard was a great teacher, and when he heard his name, he had a really strong response and knew that this would be his teacher. So he went and sought him out. And when they met, Marpa accepted him as his student, but he said, he said, "It's quite true that you're adept in sorcery, so I'll call you Great Sorcerer. And since you seem to have plenty of energy, I would like you to build a house for my son. When you've completed it, I shall teach you and supply you with food and whatever you need during your study." So he then took Milarepa to an east of a mountain ridge and described a circular structure and ordered him to begin building it. But before he was almost finished, he came back and he said, Marpa said, "Well, I didn't consider the matter well. Demolish this and return the earth and stones to the place where you took them from." So he did that. Later, he took Milarepa to the western side of the ridge and described a crescent-shaped ground plan. But when Milarepa had finished about half of that, the Lama came while he was working, and he said, "No, this won't do. Put the stones and earth back where you found them." He says, "I seem to have been tipsy when I told you to build that house, but now I really want a really nice one on this side. A tantric mystic's dwelling should be triangular, so build me one like that. It will not be torn down." So Milarepa started work on a triangular building. But before that was finished, Marpa showed up again and he said, "Come down immediately. Who gave you the order to build a house like that? You must have been out of my mind to tell you like this." And Milarepa said, "But you assured me that you considered it, and you seem to be in a perfectly normal state of mind." "What? Were you trying to destroy me by means of sorcery? It looks like a magical triangle. Demolish it at once. Go and put these earthen stones back where you took them from." So, thirsting for the teachings, Milarepa obeyed. He says by this time he had a big sore on his back, and so he went to the Marpa's wife and begged for help to obtain the promised teachings. So Marpa called him into his room. He said, "I will now give you the instructions of 3 refuges, but if you want the secret teaching, you'll have to work harder." He said, "On this spot, I want you to build a white tower with 9 stories and an ornamental 10th story. When you've finished, I'll give you all the teaching you want." And not trusting this at this point, having learned his lesson, Milarepa asked if Marpa's wife could be witness to this statement. And so she witnessed the statement. He was hoping that would work. So he did build his building, or at least started, and was invited to attend an initiation for practice. And he was sitting there when Marpa said, "Great sorcerer, where is your offering for this initiation?" And Milarepa said, "But you promised when I finished the house you'd bestow the initiation." And Marpa grabbed him by his hair and threw him out. He said, "What impertinence, what a presumption, as if putting together some mud and stones were enough offering for these priceless teachings obtained to me from India at the cost of my life. Out!" So poor Milarepa was in a state of despair. And he went back to work on the 9-storied tower, and had nearly finished, and his back had become one big sore. And he showed the sore to Marpa's wife and begged her to remind Marpa of the promise. And so the wife is like, "What are you doing to this guy? His back is a mess. His sores are infected. You're going to get a bad reputation amongst all the other teachers." So as a consolation, Marpa showed Milarepa how he could like double fold his cloth on top of his back so his sores wouldn't get infected, and send him back to work. So Milarepa's working on the tower, he's mixing mortar, and he saw a big party arrive. And it was Lama Nokpa, who was one of the other great teachers, the one who mastered the explanations of Tantra. And Marpa's wife gave Milarepa a turquoise offering so that when he went to the initiation this time he'd have something. He would be empty-handed. So Milarepa again tried to get teachings, and he offered the turquoise, and Marpa said, "Hey, this looks like my turquoise." And he asked his wife about it, and she said, "Yes, this was given to my parents at our wedding because they noticed that you had a short temper, and they thought this might help." And Marpa's like, "Well, if it belongs to you and you belong to me, then this belongs to me anyway, so you're giving me my own thing." So you can guess what happened. Milarepa got thrown out, again, thrown down the stairs. And then again in a state of despair, he went to Lama Nokpa and took some relics from Marpa that were given to him by Marpa's wife, and asked for teachings. And Lama Nokpa gave him teachings, and Milarepa practiced, but nothing happened. And Lama Nokpa says, "I don't get it. You're doing all of the things and then nothing's happening." And then he got a letter from Marpa describing this wicked person who'd stolen all of these things from him, and telling him to send him back. And he said, "Well, gee, no wonder it's not working. You didn't get the Guru's cooperation." And he said, "There's no spiritual growth without the Guru's cooperation." So Milarepa got sent back. So then he decided he was going to kill himself. And he was in despair.
The wife intervened. Yes.
Well, the wife had intervened a number of times. So now I guess, so the wife did, but Marpa said, this time he told his wife, "Go and invite Great Sorcerer in today. He'll be the guest of honor." So then Marpa said, "Well, all the anger that I've displayed has never been ordinary worldly anger." He said it was meant to help Milarepa on the path to enlightenment. If I'd been able to plunge this spiritual son of mine 9 times into utter despair, he would have been completely cleansed from obstacles. But then he blames his wife, which This must be common to marriages. He said, but due to my wife's ill-timed pity, he has been subjected to only 8 tribulations, and so there still remains some demerit within him. He says, but now I'm going to care for him and give him all the teachings and initiations which are as dear to me as my own heart. So therefore, now rejoice. So Milarepa got his teachings and was given his new name, Laughing Vajra. So I don't know, whenever I'm doing prostrations, I always like to think of Milarepa like out in his field rolling his rocks around into these towers and shapes. All right. So next what I'd like to do is I'd like to do the practice. And so if you have your texts, go ahead and turn to the Palden Sawe prayer at the beginning.
Where did you call it? Page 1.
And it's page 1, Palden Sawe.
Prayers are often titled by the first several words in the prayer.
Okay.
Did you want to say anything about lineage?
Just an observation about the various stories of lineage masters. The story of Milarepa in some ways is kind of unique because there's a lot of information about all the trials that he went through that are and his background and all the wrong things that he did. But most of the stories are actually just about the practice development of the teachers. And our usual sense of biography is more akin to what we hear in the story of Milarepa, which I think is one of the reasons that we like it. And it's actually most biographies are kind of a history of the unfolding of confusion and a little bit of insight along the way. But most of the biographies that you'll read are more about the teachers that this person met and the practices that they received. They're more about the unfolding of the wisdom, which is actually the precious thing about this life, is the opportunity for this wisdom to unfold. But our life experience is usually more about our confusion. And so we look at some of these biographies and we want to say, well, I want to know how so-and-so got on with brothers and sisters, or like that, or what did they do? What did the family do? And things like that. So they can often be, some of the biographies can be somewhat dissatisfying from that perspective. But it is a reminder to recall what is actually centrally important, what is the deep potential in our own life. And we of course have to deal with all the confusion and whatnot that we experience and all the patterns and momentum of that. But looking into our own experience, it's more more significant what we actually do from here on to cultivate our own potential, get access to that. And so when we look at some of the biographies, it's good to remember kind of both sides, because sometimes we will be offered the kind of blow-by-blow account that we're offered in the life of Milarepa, and other times we're not. And we can sometimes feel a little bit cheated because of our usual expectations about biography. But think more about our potential and where we go from here and what's deeply possible. And it's just one thought I had.
Thank you. Well, now I'm feeling a little guilty because my favorite fact about the first Karmapa is apparently he was really ugly and looked like a monkey. And that, for some reason, that means a lot to me.
There's just enough of those things thrown in that there are little ways to access that.
So I thought that, well, I was hoping that we could do the practice in Tibetan, chant the practice in Tibetan. I usually do some of the things in Tibetan and some in English when I'm doing it by myself. But I thought, it's rare to get an opportunity to practice Nindro in a group, and I thought it might be nice to do it in Tibetan. So that said, I'm not an experienced chant leader, nor somebody who's like naturally good with melodies. So as a backup, I broke down the recordings of Bill and Dora into little individual pieces in case I need a little help with the melodies. But let's start with page 1, and we'll just do page 1 and then pause before going to the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. Sawe lama rinpoche lakichi war pide den shula kadrin jimbo gune jezunte usum tugi godru zabduzo. And now let's do the 4 thoughts that turn the mind, pages 3 through 6, and then we'll pause before we go to Refuge and Bodhicitta on page 7. Dang Bogum Jada Jorin Chindi Toka Jigla Dare Danuja Nipano Chutam Che Mitaching Gusudruwe Tseso Chubudra Nam Chi Jame Shitse rawang menduar leni dagir jachir dik babang Gilwe jawe tak tu dawarja jisan yin re rang yun ilata jiba gorwe ne druk de jurzo dunya Sangit Haktu Narwecher So Sarjipe Shemegatunja Jin Shri Chune Zambe Drang Dru. So why don't we take about 5 minutes and you can pick one of the 4 thoughts that turn the mind and do a contemplation or a reflection on that, and I'll ring the bell when 5 minutes are up. So starting on page 7, it says, in order to become suitable receptacles and for all actions to be integrated with the path of liberation, we recite the liturgy for refuge and bodhicitta. And so we'll recite together pages 7 through 10. And why don't, when we get to page 10, we'll recite it 3 times together in chant form, and then kind of like when we do Chinrezi together on Sundays, then we'll sort of go at our own pace and do the refuge prayer recitations. And the instruction that I was given was that if you do mental prostrations instead of physical prostrations, that you should do 2 recitations instead of 1, and count that as 1. And the other thing that I was taught was that that's a really good opportunity, since you're not bouncing up and down, to try to really explore your visualization and work on the visualization. So, and then we'll do the Paulin Salwe prayer, 7:21, or as many times as you can. Yeah. And then I'll pause us, and then we'll move on to the. Yes, Cindy.
When you said it's a good time to work on your visualization, I've never done the prostrations without prostrating. I
Yes.
sort of imagined that if I was doing it without prostrating, I would visualize myself doing the prostration. Or is it that you want me to visualize the refuge tree, or can you alternate between either?
Yes, you can alternate between either. That's what I do. I try to imagine that I'm physically doing it too, and that's part of it.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
my mind tends to drift around the whole universe of the visualization. Any other questions? All right.
Dandu tso paksam chongjinji chongpo sawa chilaya gankar Ibe yuma sentri pemadan nide tendu tsawe Dorje changa gagyula megur dundu idam izu sanjedam gyabzu damzu yundu gindundam nintri uktu Chigyam Sangwana Susorik Jun Kodzogyam Sagar Sotai Noising Tengdu Gagyagi Magin Tamche Chok tam che ki gu zung to yun chen trin le tam che chi mo yi pa zhi ki gong bo tong zhuang yi zhu za zhi zhung le bang de gin dun tam che ki na da drin chen za la dang yu pa zhi ba lin nam ma dam ba nam la gyam su chiao idang gil gor ji la zong nam la gyam su chiao san je jom din de nam la gyam su chiao nam pe ju nam la gyam su chiao nam pe gin du nam la gyam su chiao ba wo gan jo chu kyo zom me zo i je gi chen dang den ba nam la gyam su chiao ho din nam ma dam ba nam la gyam su chiao idang gil gor ji la zong nam la gyam su chiao san je jom din de nam la gyam su chiao nam pe ju nam la gyam su chiao bang pe gin du nam la gyam su chiao ba wo gan jo chu kyo zom me zo i je gi chen dang den ba nam la gyam su chiao ba den nam ma dam ba nam la gyam su chiao idang gil gor ji la zong nam la gyam su chiao san je jom den de nam la gyam su chiao dam pe ju nam la gyam su chiao mang pe gin du nam la gyam su chiao ba wo gan jo chu kyo zom me zo i je gi chen dang den ba nam la gyam su chiao
So now we'll do pages 11 through 17, starting with the Bodhisattva vow. And we'll do the Bodhisattva vow 3 times. And then also when we get to the 4 immeasurables on page 16, we'll also do those 3 times, but all in Tibetan. And you're also welcome to, if you want to get in a sort of left knee up, right knee down position for the vow. Give you a second to do that. Oops, I forgot to turn the mic back on. So I was just saying that we'll do the Bodhisattva vow 3 times on page 11, and the 4 immeasurables prayer 3 times as well when we get there on page 16.
Changchub Ningpo Chiki Bar Sanje Nam Lakyam Suchi Shudang Changchub Senpai Zonan Dejin Kyam Suchi Jitar Ronji Desheki Changchu Tugnik Yirpada Changchu Simpe Napala Dedarin Jin Patar Dejin Drula Pendundu Changchu Sinik Hijishing Lejin Tuni La Pala Rinpa Jindu La Parjo Changchu Nyingpo Jikiba Sanje Nama Gyam Suchi Jidang Changchu Senpai Zolang Dejin Gyam Suji Jitang Ronji Deshegi Shangchu Tugnik Yepada Changchu Senpa La Pala Dedarin Jin Nepada Dejin Drula Pendundu Changchu Sinik Hijishing Dejin Duni Rapala Rinpa Jindu La Parjo Changchu Singpo Jikiba Sanje Nam Lakyam Suji Shudang Changchu Senpai Zolang Dejin Gyam Suji Jitang Gonji Deshegi Changchu Tugnik Yepada Changchu Zembe Apala Dedarin Jin Yepada Dejin Drula Pendundu Changchu Sinik Hijishing Dejin Duni Rapala Rinpa Jindu La Parjo. se tribuyo mi se pale pardo Derik sanjerik sugin sanje se sudak denyur Dani dagi chinegya Rikdang tun beret zamde Kyun me tun berik dira Nyokmar mi gyurde tarja Dagi derik yopatam chegi Chingadro wade shegi dangni Bardu de la trunde berzinji Radharamin masogawarji Sangchu semni rinpoche Mage panan ke gyurji Ke panyam me padam Gomne gomdu navarsho Jangchu sendam indrelsi Jangchu jina jawada Sanjinam kiyam zungjin Tuki enam hongwarsho Changchu senparam kini Judum tulagom drusho Gombo yini gangomba Semnin nam lade drusho Semchin tam jete dang din gyurjik Gendro tam jedak dudang garsho Changchu zimba gangdak sajubba Dedak kunji mun lam druparsho Zim jim tam dewa dang dewe yu dang dem par yujik Dunyal dang dunyal ji yu dang drawar yujik Dunyal mi de dewa dang ba dang min drawar yujik Nering jagdang dang drawe dang yon jimbo lane par yujik Zim jin dam je dewa dang dewe yu dang dem par yujik Dunyal dang dunyal ji yu dang drawar yujik Dunyal mi be dewa dang ba dang min drawar yujik Nering jagdang dang yawe dang yon jimbo lane par yujik Dim jin dam je dewa dang dewe yu dang yin par yujik Dunyal dang dunyal ji yu dang drawar yujik Dunyal mi be dewa dang ba dang min drawar yujik Nering jagdang dang drawe dang yon jimbo lane par yujik
let's finish by doing the dedication prayers at the end. It looks like page 63 in my text. It's the dedication prayer beginning Gindi Drowa.
Gindi Drowa Malu Dorje Zen Takde Tabje Jowe Chimejin Namgi Lamne Dorje Drowa Samje Niki Gopang Topjungo Yewade Nudura Chagya Jimpo Drugurne Joa Chigya Malupa Deisara Goparjo Zanje Guzum Nyebejinada Chunyi Migudin Bejinada Gindun Mijedun Bejinagi Jitango Amunadrubajo.
Okay, so we'll have a 15-minute break, and I'll start ringing the bell when it's time to come back.
Bill, you might be a good person to ask. I'm supposed to shrink this window, and I want to make sure not to click everything off.
Is this YouTube or
This is
YouTube?
YouTube, and there's very specific instructions, and I'm just,
Oh, it's YouTube?
yeah.
I told everybody from the Ustream today. That's what was agreed.
Oh,
You were sent a link for Ustream today.
for Ustream? Oh, no.
Yeah.
The only instructions I had here were YouTube, so I went with them. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
well. Did you get any?
Oh, well.
Sometimes you do something to make it easy and it only becomes harder.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, don't feel bad. I'm
Because
just.
Because you'd done
Yeah, I told
Ustream.
Brian
Yeah.
I'd done Ustream, so I figured I'd do Ustream, but then there
So
were
you
no
didn't see my
instructions.
memo, up to my email last night.
No.
Because I should have came back to them. Well,
We could tell people that it was
right now.
right now. But anyway, that said, this is YouTube, and I'm supposed to shrink the screen. And
I
I
have
just,
no idea.
okay, well, I'll just push a button.
When in doubt.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
I would say I'm glad to be back, but I'm not sure I'm all the way back yet.
When did you get back?
Thursday.
Thursday.
Thursday afternoon.
Oh, man. No delays, though?
No,
Plane trip, okay?
Everything went very smoothly.
Good.
Apart from feeling like we should have had about 2 more days every place that we went
Oh,
in order to not feel like we had to sprint around quite so much.
uh-huh. Too much packing and unpacking to relax.
Yeah. It was good.
So as I was preparing for this, today I asked a friend who has done a lot of Nindra practice if they had some wisdom to share, and I wanted to share what they wrote because I really like it. Let's see, I really love the refuge and prostration part of Nindra. And here's some suggestions. First, make it an inspiring space, a place where you feel happy. As beautiful an altar as you're able, that includes pictures of everyone who has taught you or inspired you. Make offerings of water, light, candle, etc. as you can. Get a really comfortable cushion or cushions. Do 3 full prostrations before sitting down. It helps me to have a big picture of the refuge tree above or adjacent to the altar, one on which you can see the lake and the other sentient beings taking refuge and all the individuals in the tree. While I'm doing prostrations, I often look at individuals on the tree, even if I'm not sure who it is, and feel a deep sense of love and appreciation for what they did for me. I start at the beginning of the sadhana, which for me is the 4 thoughts which turn the mind towards the Dharma. I like to do that in English, not sure why, though I often do the refuge lines, Palin, Lama, Padma, in Tibetan. It's really important not to feel overwhelmed by the daunting number of prostrations. Or I guess it's really easy to feel overwhelmed by the daunting number of prostrations, but don't. Just start with 1 and keep going. Don't do too many at first or you won't keep going. Don't fixate on the number. Don't set a given number for any session. Just do as many as your heart and your body feel is right for that session. This way, you might just wind up doing more than you expected, and without all the fear and dread. Frustrations really are beautiful when you can lose yourself in them. And this is in capitals. And don't count. There's one thing that spoils it, it's counting. Where's the mala? Did I move a beat or that for this one or that one? Instead, it helps to establish how many you can do in an hour or 10 minutes or whatever. Note when you start and stop, and then calculate how many you did based on that. I tried that. I couldn't let go of the counting though. I loved the counting. Let's see. I have an Excel spreadsheet.
To how many decimal points?
Well, I realized that I could actually, I didn't do it, but I could actually calculate like how much formal practice time I've spent between today and when I started Nundro, if I wished. I could actually, it's
all there.
you know, it's what 26 years of school will do for you. Like, get some habits pretty deep. Let's see. Don't tell anyone, except maybe your spiritual friend, how many prostrations you've done, or it may become a competitive sport. May. Let's see. It isn't helpful to compare yourself to anyone else. It's too easy to be smug and lose the whole benefit of it if you do the most or the best or the fastest. So just shut up about it. Let's see. We always did the Bodhisattva vow part on our right knees and then sat down for the prayers part of rejoicing. Those prayers provide such a wonderful release and joy after all that hard work that I can easily get moved to tears. At the end, I also love the feeling of letting the objects of refuge melt into light and dissolve into me. And it's a good preparation for Vajrasattva practice. But I could never remain in that place as long as I wanted. Let's see, my Dharma sisters and brothers all had 6.5 or 7 foot long masonite boards cut for easier sliding. I couldn't do that. Instead, I wore down a patch of carpeting that I loved working on. I had wrist issues, so sometimes if we were doing mini prostrations, I wore wrist splints, really helpful. I didn't have knee problems, but I know some people did, and they didn't like working on carpet. One person couldn't do prostrations at all, so she did bows from the waist. And I still remember Ephraim Miller doing prostrations on a table. I guess you find a way to make it work for you, so you can concentrate on the practice and not the hardships that can be part of it. It all works out somehow, if you want it to. So let's see. With that, I think open it. Bill, if you have anything you wanted to say, but generally this is intended to be time that we can have a conversation about practice and what's challenging and what's helpful, and kind of share our collective experience and wisdom on the subject.
Just noting that the comments that you read, and also your counterpoint to the counting or not counting, it does point out how individual this practice is and how we have to find our own way into it. So that's something that we should rejoice in as the challenge of what's there, as opposed to be concerned about getting it just the right way, or looking over our shoulder to see how other people are doing it and feeling like maybe we're not doing it the right way exactly, because we will have to we have to find our own way into refuge. We have to find our own way into practice, and any practice that we're expected to do in an extended way. And the 100,000, whether we count it or not, gives some kind of indication that this is an extended exploration. We have to find our way into it. We have to really see what it is. And that's part of what we have to take up with some joy.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I've really found that doing the prostrations in Tibetan has been useful. I really notice a big difference in my experience. But how about the rest of the prayers and everything? Is it important to do those in Tibetan as well, or?
Kind of like switching things up. I kind of like switching things up, because it's, well, there's a lot of them, so there's lots of opportunities to do it different ways. And so I guess that personally I find myself sometimes doing things in English and then sometimes in Tibetan. And there's parts where I clearly favor English or Tibetan. Like I favor English for the four thoughts. And then I tend to favor the Tibetan for anything that I'm doing repetitively. What's been your experience, Linda?
Well, I wanted to memorize it so I didn't have to keep looking at the text.
Uh-huh.
So I memorized it in English first. And
Yeah.
so that's why I use the English all the time.
Uh-huh.
So I can, so I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But, and then I learned the Tibetan for doing the prostrations. And that was just a whole different experience because instead of thinking about what I was saying, it was more kind of getting into the flow of it. So that's another question I have, is because sometimes I almost get into a spacey, where I'm right in the scene, right, and then I kind of find myself not even saying the right words. I'm get my words mixed, my chant mixed up. Anyway, so this happens to me a lot. It's like, I don't know if it's spacing out or if I'm really getting into it. How present do I need to be, fully awake? Is that the intention? Or is it okay to, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I mean, my bias, and I'd be interested to hear what other people think, is that sort of as awake, alert, and relaxed as you can be at the same time, like we're sort of striving for in shamatha, would be optimal also in Nundro. That said, my own experience is that the physical exertion really ups the energy level.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it gives you the opportunity to try to function when you've got a lot of energy. So it's analogous to if you're in a confrontation, or if you're anxious, or if you're panicking. It's a physical state. It's the context obviously is not the same, but the energy and how I feel internally reminds me of that. So I like to think of it as an opportunity to practice being clear-headed and relaxed, despite the fact that my body's moving all over the place, and And there's a lot of energy usually, and a lot of physical sensations too. What do other people think about that?
I think it's really hard to become distracted when you're doing body, speech, and mind. In the one, you were working so hard to keep it all coordinated together that a whole lot less creeps in of the discursive stuff that we normally live with. So I think it's, really helpful to do those three things together. Although I will say today was the first time I ever did prostrations in a chair. And my visualization today was much better than it had ever been in all the time I've done nundros. So there you go.
Yeah.
So there's probably not one right way to do it.
I think that's sort of playing with the notion of the thought of a right way. And there not being one right way, but there always being a right way. And so as we're practicing, trying to find that spot, and it may be at one point the right way is to relax a little more, or the right way might be to become more vivid and more precise. Sometimes the right way might be to slow down just a little bit physically. Sometimes the right thing might be to engage with a little bit more physical exertion. But then that begs the question of sort of what would be what's the guideline within that? And your point about it's similar to shamatha, and in shamatha too, sometimes too tight, sometimes too loose, and so trying to see what's going on. And sometimes we could say, oh well, you should never be distracted. So do whatever you can to be so energetic and firm and tight in your practice that you're just completely. That's obviously not the instruction. So it means that sometimes we will be distracted. And sometimes we have to tighten up a little bit. So when you're describing the part about, I relax into the scene, but then I find myself kind of scrambling the words a little bit. I said, okay, maybe just a little more energy at that moment in kind of bringing the focus together a little bit, so that the recitation becomes clearer again. But not treating it as though it's kind of like, just another wrong way to do it.
No.
But it's just, there's some potential there. But if we say, well, but so then I fix that. I'm so riveted on the words that I've never stumbled once. But I'm so rigid about it that I've lost track of the relationship. I actually can no longer step into the scene. So this is part of the exploration. We do have to explore it, and we do have to develop that capacity in ourselves to see what the right way is at that moment. What is it? See what we are doing. Without but then the notion of the right way then can introduce, then you can wind up with this kind of hyper self-critical thing. Okay, all right, well that's obvious. So you see how it goes. no matter what you do to correct something, you can overcorrect in another way, and that becomes its own thing. So finding the way through it, where we do develop deeper and deeper relationship with the whole scene. I like your that sense of I really find myself kind of just really in the whole scene. Really, with that sense of connection with all beings and the sense of connection with the sources of refuge. That's really kind of that's one aspect of the sweet spot in the practice is really being in that, really feeling the dynamic of that. And as you were saying, when we're engaged with body, speech, and mind, when we're really doing all these things, it gives us an opportunity to while we're engaged in a very active way, to keep this overall sensibility, which we lose most of the time. We don't actually have a continuous sense of our connection with refuge, our connection with sense of direction, our sense of connection with our own potential, our sense of connection with that example of the ones who have that deeply accomplished, realized this. We lose track of our relationship with all beings, which is always manifesting, but we tend to get very narrow and very selective. And when we're in a panic or something is triggering the things that would cause us to become angry, to go into that, those kinds of, the bigger picture is lost. The sense of that context is lost. So refuge with the prostrations, it's an incredibly skillful scene to place ourselves in. It's a very skillful circumstance to place ourselves in, to be able to cultivate so many things. So I find it's very interesting. It's very interesting. The physical dimension of it is, I think, in some ways, I think it's more significant for us in some respects, because we tend to be a very abstract society. We're now living in the information age, so it's even gone beyond sort of our kind of personal sense of intellectual aesthetic into this kind of what's the truly important is this all this stuff and this information flowing around, and it's very easy to become detached from the ways that we function, that our basic physical being and what we do with that and the impact of that and the potential of it. So I think it's actually good. So I really like the tabletop prostration, or just making a gesture, or just holding one's palms together, or just adopting whatever posture is the kind of your sense of best posture of the moment, given, and it may be that it's kind of paralyzed, literally, I'm not joking, it could be paralyzed on one side and in bed, but then to really hold that sense of our physical being as though this is perfect posture, this is perfect expression of sort of embodying bodhicitta, embodying my practice, and really hold that. I think it's significant. I think it's a significant piece, and not to be kind of belittled or again sort of criticized. Oh, well, I'm not doing the real prostrations, but to take whatever potential we have and to really sort of inhabit it, really physically inhabit whatever that potential is.
It seems to me, Bill, that the measure of it, or the success of it, if you want to speak in those terms, is not in what you put into it, how good that is, but in what you get out of it. I mean,
I don't know. Let's.
Well, no,
Go ahead.
it's to me, if I feel I have established some connection with the lineage,
Mhm.
you know, and I can feel them, you know, helping me,
Mhm.
that is a successful period of practice. If you want to say successful, unsuccessful, that's another whole discussion.
Mhm.
But, you know, if I just focus on, well, did I do all the motions exactly right? Did I get all the syllables perfect?
Mhm.
It doesn't leave a lot of space for an emotional attachment to the lineage. And yeah, that might look good on a video somewhere, but that's not the point of what I'm doing. The point of what I'm doing is to establish a connection here.
Yes.
Mhm. The problem with focusing on what you get out of it
Yeah,
is if what you get out of it changes,
sure.
then you can say, oh, I'm not getting the right thing out of it anymore. So,
But sometimes you do, sometimes you don't.
yeah. But it can feel like then my practice has become a failure because I'm not getting this thing out of it.
Which is why you probably shouldn't think in those terms.
Yeah, but this again,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
kind of this is where we actually have to develop a little bit of humor,
Mhm.
a sense of humor about the way that we engage with things. That we say, oh, you should never think about the results. Well, frankly, that's a bit of BS. Because we will think about results, we do think about results, but if we think only about results in that, then we're going to get ourselves all wound up in something. So never think about the result. I never think about the result. Well, then you probably won't engage in this. Something else will happen, but there's something else positive could happen. But it will be one of these things of steering. It's I don't know, that basic piece on the not too tight, not too loose. It's kind of it has a larger sense than just that immediate thing.
When you talk about the purpose of it, one thing I noticed was, Eric, you suggested labeling this session Refuge and Prostrations. And then, when I looked at the actual title in my Nindra book, it actually said Refuge and Bodhicitta,
Yeah.
which, when I was looking at Ocean of Certainty the other day, because I wanted to see, what do they say about this Refuge and Prostrations, which is how I think of it too.
Mhm.
And there was a big emphasis on the development of bodhicitta. And so I was wondering if you could talk about, is that, it seems like each of the Nindro sections has a slightly different angle that they're looking at this puzzle with.
Mhm.
And I wondered if that's considered generally one of the bigger parts of the Refuge and Prostrations is this development of bodhicitta.
Well, I can quote. I saw Taisitu Rinpoche explain it pretty matter-of-factly. He said, well, prostrations allow you to do physical purification. Vajrasattva with the visualization and the mantra allows you to purify your thoughts and your speech. Mandala allows you to accumulate merit, and Guru Yoga allows you to accumulate wisdom. So, to me, I don't even know what any of that stuff means. But the cool thing, the thing that I love about Nandra is that I don't need to understand it at all. And my experience of it is that it is beneficial, but not in a linear way where I could predict, okay, I'm doing this and then this good thing is going to happen. Like I do it and then something good happens that's often better than what I would have come up with on my own. And it's a surprise too. So I think I appreciate it because I can't understand it, and I'm really good at understanding stuff. And but if the part of me that understands stuff had the answers, then I wouldn't need to even be here. Like I'd have it all figured out. But that is not the case. So I love this aspect of it's kind of a mystery how it works. As to your question about the bodhicitta, what Trungpa Rinpoche said in talking about the practices is he said, well, the refuge vow protects you from an incorrect path. He says, by combining with the physical act of prostrations, the power is greatly increased. But he said, you're taking refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and the Sangha, and the other jewels, and that is a protection from wandering down a wrong path. And he said the function of the bodhicitta, or the bodhisattva vow, he said the function of the bodhisattva vow is to generate bodhicitta, he said, which protects you from lower paths. And so, presumably, any path which is grounded in putting the benefit of others ahead of yourself, or at least equal to yourself, is a higher path, and a path that, a lower path presumably is one where you're trying to seek your own benefit.
Traditionally, the label would be the refuge and bodhicitta. We tend to be very fascinated by the prostrations. That's kind of like sticks out. Never seen that before, so oh yeah, we're doing prostrations, and that's. But it is refuge and bodhicitta. And sometimes they're actually separated into two pieces in some Wendo practices. But, yeah. No, they're integrated. They're integrated in the prostration element, and the visualization with the all sentient beings. We have the all sentient beings who we are kind of the leader of. We're all going to refuge. That sense of kind of the courage of the bodhisattva. You take on this kind of level of kind of energy, and it's good. It's like I'm the one that just happened to notice that all the Buddhists and Bodhisattvas were in front of us. I'm bringing it to everybody's attention, so that we have this opportunity to engage, and that's kind of the deep thing we can go for. So, as you said, the protection against the incorrect path. It's kind of like this is pointing kind of to the heart of the matter, and so we as kind of leaders of all sentient beings are saying, see, it's right here in front of us. It's right here in front of us. And with our physical prostration, then imagining that we're also kind of our energy actually physically carries all sentient beings. So it's the refuge and bodhicitta is developed together there. And the prostrations are more the method.
Yes, Carol.
I wanted to say that left to my own devices, I get really sloppy. I go really fast. And I think it's really nice to be reminded. I'd forgotten that there was Tibetan there, even though I'm reading the English under it, I do the English. So coming here, doing it in Tibetan, remembering, because the first year I did it in Tibetan, but now I've just become, it's speedy demon, you know. So I really appreciate hearing everybody. It sort of helps bring me back to why I'm doing it. And there's parts of it I love, like the heroic thing, you know, I feel like, oh yeah, now that I'm the family,
Yes.
we're the family and I won't do anything.
You're a child of the Buddhas.
I'm a child of the Buddha
Yeah.
and I could be virtuous. I love, you know, there's parts of it that just help me, even though I'm
Yeah.
sloppy and fast. But
Yeah.
so it's just very nice to be reminded of all the other parts of it that I've gotten casual with. Thank you.
In Torch of Certainty, I don't know who the interviewer is, but he tries, or she tries to get, well, I don't know if this happened all at once or if it was linearly, but there's the three teachers who are being asked questions are Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, Kala Rinpoche, and Sakya teacher Dejang Rinpoche. And so, so the interviewer asks, well, what are the indications of a successful practice? And Kala Rinpoche just says, well, increased faith, devotion, insight, and compassion, a stronger interest in Dharma practice, and lack of interest in worldly matters. And Dejang Rinpoche says something very similar. And then, of course, Trungpa Rinpoche says, basically, you'll be less arrogant and less opinionated. And then the interviewer asks, well, how does an individual know when his practice of the four foundations has been unsuccessful? And Kala Rinpoche's answer was, the effects of unsuccessful practice will be the opposite of those of successful practice. The obscurations will increase, faith will diminish, and so on. Dejang Rinpoche's response was to laugh uproariously at the absurdity of the question of how can the four foundations be unsuccessful.
Yeah, if you don't do it.
And then, let's see, and then Trungpa Rinpoche said, well, if you become more arrogant and opinionated, it means you don't have enough compassion and sympathy, and that something is wrong with your practice. So,
He's very opinionated about that, I see.
yeah. I had the same thought when I read that. I was like, that's kind of an arrogant and opinionated answer, but okay. You know, he might have intended it that way. Let's see. So the person's not satisfied. So they're like, well, what should a person do if they feel like their practice has been unsuccessful? So Kala Rinpoche says, failure of the practice is usually due to the person's inability to prevent thoughts from wandering during practice and being burdened with great obscurations. To correct this, he should ponder the four thoughts again. So doesn't that sound like a teaching that we would get? Yeah. If so inclined, he should repeat the foundation practices or rely on a yidam meditation, such as Chinrezi, which seems to be very effective in such situations. And Dejang Rinpoche says, an individual who has not made any progress should again practice taking refuge and doing prostrations. So if you're not making progress in refuge and prostrations, do it again. And practice the Vajrasattva meditation to clear away obscurations responsible for the lack of progress. And then practice Guru Yoga to increase faith in the Guru. So let's see, an individual's lack of progress is often due to the fact that he's not really begun to appreciate the precious human existence, impermanence, and so on. If he appreciates these, true meditation will occur. Lack of this appreciation and lack of faith will obstruct true meditation. And then Trungpa has opinions about this. He says, if an individual's practice is not working, it's because he approaches it as some kind of gymnastics. Due to a lack of genuine renunciation, he's still blinded by the confused world. In order to see clearly, the practitioner should return to tranquility and insight meditation. So this is like a big difference between the three teachers. Trungpa really feels like you should do shamatha first and establish some tranquility and insight. This advice is not in conflict with the other Rinpoches, because the other Rinpoches said, no, you can just do this. You don't need to do something else first. He says, the four thoughts are a contemplative discipline by which you develop disgust with samsara. If you practice tranquility and insight as the basis of the whole spiritual journey, then the four thoughts will arise as natural process.
And if I remember correctly, the gal who was the interviewer interviewed him at 3 different times. It wasn't all at once.
That makes more sense. Although Trungpa seems to be aware of what the other teachers said. But, yeah, but maybe that's clairvoyance.
Well, he was also quite aware that he had a different approach.
Yeah.
That was very clear. This observation that the four thoughts would be a sort of a natural consequence of doing calm, abiding, and insight is that's worth parking in your mind and contemplating that, and certainly quite related to the thing that Bokar Rinpoche emphasized and used the word gom for meditation, becoming familiar with your own mind. So becoming familiar with our minds and all the things that arise in it, if we're really doing that honestly, then we will start to notice a lot. We'll start to notice very fundamental things. And it's quite easy to see how we might start to see what was precious or what was important and what was kind of superfluous. We think about all the things that come up in the mind and the circles that we go through and think, well, is that really the most important thing? Is to regurgitate that thing that whatever it was that just keeps me thinking over and over and over and over and over. Is that really the important thing or not? What's actually then to have some kind of experience, a little bit of freedom. You can think, oh, that freedom is more important than this other stuff. So it's worth thinking, looking to see how so much of the practice really can just sort of if you really pay attention to experience, become very clear about what experience is. Pretty much everything, I'll go out on a limb and say, and I have the opinion that pretty much all aspects of practice could flow out of that. It's there's nothing sort of arbitrary that's inserted that's not actually related to discovering something very fundamental about our experience. What is most fundamental about our experience? It's all connected back to that. So if doing the practice allows us to discover that, discovering that would allow us to see actually how all the different practices can facilitate that discovery.
I find myself really drawn to the little comments that precede the four practices. And for refuge and prostrations, it's in order to become suitable receptacles and for all actions to be integrated with the path of liberation, we recite the liturgy for refuge and bodhicitta. And I wondered if anybody else was attached to those.
I always read all those. I think they feel important. So I don't know if I'm attached, but that I noticed, like I did it with Sally, and I didn't want to share it. So I want to share that part. I don't know. It's just funny. It's like it was private. Also takes more time.
Some of them feel more pithy than others. I've just happened to glance at the page preceding where the parenthetical, the small, they're actually called yikchung, which just means small letters. And they're not intended for formal recitation, but some of them feel like they're much more central than others. But I'm going from the one that you've just mentioned to the one previous, which is, such are the four ordinary preliminary practices,
Yeah.
which doesn't feel quite so kind of hard-hitting. So, but definitely some of those parenthetical comments will be, it almost feels like you're sort of missing something if you're not
Right.
not reciting those, or they provide a little bit more. In Vajrasattva, the piece, light rays from Vajrasattva's heart invoke the wisdom deities who are absorbed into him. As a result, we meditate that Vajrasattva is the essential embodiment of the rare and sublime ones. It feels a little bit more, I always ended up reciting that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not necessary. Some practices are very, very short on actual recitation. The Yikchung actually reflects the things that you should sort of have internalized already. So that it gets closer and closer to the recitation just being a very brief reminder of the sense of the practice. We've talked some about the English and the Tibetan, and Michael has sometimes thought, well, sometimes to do it actually without formal recitation, and you have really some sense of the meaning of it. I don't think that works particularly in relationship to the formal recitation piece, the Vajrasattva mantra, not like that. But to just go through the practice, particularly the things that are the visualization, or some of the prayers where it's you have some real sense of it, some felt sense of the relationship, some felt sense of the quality. So those are all things. So it gets beyond sort of one way or another way, this way or that way. You pop in a third possibility.
Anyone struggling with obstacles to practice that they would like to share or discuss?
There's one little thing. Like when I read through or I'm doing the practice, I don't, like when I come to Vajradhara or Dorje Chang, or I assume they're the same guy. Like all that pops into my head is like blue guy, you know. I'm like, it's blue guy. Like, okay, there's a blue guy out there, and then like when I hear yidams, I'm just like, okay, those are the ones who've got mandalas, so I'll just imagine mandala-y kind of formations, because I don't really know how else to represent them. And then for the Kagyu Lamas, is that just the people in the lineage who have already died? And if they, or is it, like, I don't know exactly what makes them fit into being a lama versus a sangha, kind of. Those are some little things that like run through my head when I'm doing it. Like I don't really know what I'm doing, kind of feelings, but you know, or that I'd like to know. It'd be nice to know a little bit more.
Well, I don't know that I know the right answer to that, but so if you look at the Refuge Tanka,
Yeah.
then Chinrezi, who we usually think of as a Yidam, is over in the Sangha.
Yeah.
And a lot of all the Yidams are these Yabyum deities that I may have heard of some of them, and then a lot of them I've never heard of. And the protectors just become kind of a cloud of fanciful creatures, because I don't really quite know how to relate to them. But I guess when I'm the way that so that's sort of if I'm looking at the Tanka. If I'm relating to it in my own practice, then what I come face to face with is my own understanding and experience of Lama, and my own understanding and experience of Buddha, and Sangha, and Dharma, and protectors, and Yidams. And over time, through my imagination, I try to make that more vivid.
Yeah.
I'm not a visualizer or a skilled visualizer, so it's often just in itty bitty little glimpses. Like this morning, I had one glimpse where there was just incredible radiance in front of me, but the rest of the time, I was like looking at the time or trying to figure out, it just comes through in peaks. But over time, those little glimpses that I've gotten have caused both what I can visualize and the way that I relate to it to change, and the degree of detail that seems to be included. It does build slowly, very slowly, over time, and becomes more personal and more meaningful and more sort of heartfelt. And so I sort of look at I like to study the details separately from doing the practice, because then every once in a while the detail will show up in the practice, and then I'm like, hey, there it is. I know who that one is.
Yeah.
And I haven't. I also get confused about, like my current teacher. Should I put him with the lamas, or should I put him with the sangha? And then, and like where, should I only put the lineage people in the central branch and stuff like that? But my actual experience of it is sometimes they're in the center, sometimes they are there. Every once in a while, my teacher's like right there where the blue guy is supposed to be sitting. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, so there he is. And but I like those little surprises. Instead of figuring out where people go, I just look and see where they are, or where they appear, or where they seem to want to be, and try to say, okay, now you're sitting over there. So not an answer, but that's mine.
No,
That's
great.
been mine.
It reminds me of Tara Sullivan once. We came on. We were talking about this a little bit, and she was just like, "Well, what's important is what's yours for you." you know. I was like, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that before. I always thought that people who'd been doing this more just knew what it was, and they'd learned it, and eventually I'd learn it too. But it's going to be individualized."
There's no reason that particularly that when you say, oh well, I think of Chenrezig, and that's sort of your kind of intro to the sense of what a yidam is. Mm-hmm. So there, Chenrezig is a yidam. Oh, Chenrezig also represents kind of the essence of the Bodhisattva Sangha. Chenrezig is over there. There's no reason that Chenrezig cannot be in two places at the same time. If that's, and then you can think of all the other yiddims. Actually, Chenrezig is the one that introduces me to kind of the sense of all these others. Then that's fine. So in a certain way, I think you understand it better than you think you do. You have some kind of relationship with Chenrezig. So you have some, and I think you can probably see that you have an understanding of Chenrezig both as a bodhisattva, representing that sensibility, that sense of the embodiment of bodhicitta, and also just from the practice, you understand some relationship with the process of doing the yidam practice, and Chenrezig representing that. And Dorji Chang Vajradhara, that's that sense of the whole lineage, kind of what goes in the center, as opposed to the sangha, are really the ones who carry the lineage of the teachings forward. So however we relate to that process, then those are the teachers that are in that, and Dorje Chang represents kind of the essence of all that. So whether we see, whether it sort of fades back and forth between actually seeing our root teacher in their ordinary form, or being reminded of that, and that pops into our minds, or whether seeing Vajradhara, Dorje Chang in the form of the blue Bodhisattva, Sambhogakaya, the blue Sambhogakaya form. But sort of understanding the relationship with that. We can say, oh, they're the Buddhas, the Dharma. So I think it's in a certain way it's more straightforward than if we try to get it all. We'll struggle going back and forth, but the struggle is part of kind of sorting things out, but not to get caught with this. There's kind of this infinite regression of, like, something could be figured out a little bit more, and so if you're only stuck on that part of it, then it always feels like I don't have it. But that in doing that and sort of struggling with things, then some things you start to find a relationship. It's just like somebody at work that you can't figure out, and then one day you sort of figure out something about them. Oh, I see. I see. And then there's something there. So you kind of relate to that. That's your door, and then you go into that. Then other things will be, wow, you can sort of struggle with that, go back and forth. But keeping it, sticking with those points of entry. I remember at the Seebeck Mahamudra, I was teaching the Refuge and Bodhicitta section, and I'm thinking this is pretty early on in the week, and this is we're going to be starting talking about Mondro, and we'll continue to talk about Mondro. And anybody who is here for the very first time, what are they actually going to be able to carry with them so that they have some point of access that might be workable somehow, some little thing, some thread to pull. But just think, Dorje Chang is holding the Vajra and the bell. It's representing the union of wisdom and compassion, the union of the two bodhicittas. It's right, sort of, Vajradhara's and Dorje Chang's right in the center, and right in the center is this symbol of holding relatively ultimate bodhicitta in union. To kind of just hang on to that, and then let things evolve from there. And so that's my sensibility in trying to work with these practices, is to find pieces like that kind of core elements that you can kind of allow things to unfold. Because everything in the refuge tree could actually be unfolded from the union of the two bodhicittas. everything there. So that's, and it's kind of, oh, yeah, that's kind of one of these places I can land on my feet. And when you say, well, I kind of think of gyms, you sort of, I kind of relate as you know. I said, okay, there, you've landed on your feet. You have, that's a spot to go from.
I can really appreciate that because I was one of those people at CBEC for the first time. And that image is one that still works for me very much to just, I feel like something works if it can generate this emotional understanding. And it's not working if I'm just seeing, like you were saying, you know, oh, I've got this perfect image of whatever yidam I'm supposed to be working with or whatever person, but there's no emotional connect. And for whatever reason, for me, that blue guy with his arms crossed works. And I've had similar experiences with different, you know, Vajrasattva and stuff. Something will just, it's not always there, and then one day you read something and it says he's the embodiment of compassion, and suddenly there's this deep understanding and emotional kind of sense. And then it's like, okay, then I figure I'm probably working with it in a way that is productive.
I mean, Otilko Rinpoche always says that the longest journey is from the head to the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a helpful way for me to see a lot of this.
You know, when I was on retreat, I finally had time to read the histories of the lineage of the Karmapas, and then I ordered a coloring book that had the different, like of the different pictures of the different tankas and stuff, and so that was really helpful because it had the history, just a short history of each of them, so I would think about that as I was coloring it, so now I've got those images in my head, and that was really helpful for me. So, you know, because you're so focused, and it's fun. So.
Body, speech, and mind. Body, speech, and mind.
Yeah.
When you actually you read and think about the individual and the history and the story, and then you actually engage physically in the creation of the image, so you're very directly interacting with that. And kind of internally, you're kind of remembering things, so there's kind of the speech, body, speech, and mind. You're fully engaged. So it's one of the first things that Dora and I did while we were traveling in India, several months in, but first things kind of based, 30 years back, right at the beginning, we did a course at Kopan Monastery, which was a Tanka painting course for 1 month. And we all painted the Buddha. We did all the things with the lines and the forms and the pencil drawing and painting. And that made a big difference. To actually stop and really do something at the speed that your hand can do it. And with the directness of that involvement, you were saying, it's harder to be distracted when body, speech, and mind are all kind of working together. There is an element of that. So doing the coloring is actually something that's very worthwhile.
Personally, I have to do those things to really stay fresh with the practice. And so I'm always looking for little things that I can do that outside of the formal practice that that I find interesting or cool or pretty or really anything like that.
Mm.
And so so I likewise, like I liked reading about the Karmapas,
Mm-hmm.
For that reason, and it definitely adds a dimension. Then when you're visualizing them all sitting up there, you can look for when you're reading through the lineage prayer, like you have associations with them,
Yeah.
and they become more like more three-dimensional and more like friends and more like people that you can relate to, just very gradually over time. And it's such a big practice that there's really an infinite number of things that there's no way to fill the whole thing up, or at least I don't think there is. If anybody has anything that they were thinking about saying but haven't, now would be the time. And then I was thinking maybe if we can find enough copies, a nice way to end might be to read through the aspirations for Mahamudra prayer. I think I have at least one copy.
Right, you're-
Oh, it should be okay. Yeah, I think it's somewhere there. So I was thinking, examine the mind stream daily. Like, I'm starting to see that how the mind that I have that's habitual is really, it would be good to jettison it in a lot of ways or detach from it. But it's scary to do that too, because it's like, I'm going to hang on to Dorje Shang and tum 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 and I think that's part of the process of feeling in a transition state where I don't know what to trust. I can't trust. I have my mind. It's gotten me this far, but it's also made me want something different. And it seems very transitional.
I got one.
Long
I guess
period.
maybe I should have the same as everyone else's, although I assume
Just got
I think I'll be okay. It should be
Yeah.
the same, right?
Yeah, it's just,
And I sat next to Steve Parker once, and he said that Lama Michael was telling him what the practices were all about, and that Steve said, "That sounds like mind washing. What's it called?
brainwashing.
Brainwashing." And Lama Michael said, "Yes."
Yeah. Take that brain,
It just
rinse it, let all that dirt shake out, and you've got this wonderful.
and it's full of Namo Guru.
Yeah.
But what are your family going to think when you say Namo Guru? Oh, Granny.
There is a very interesting kind of stage of recognizing that the things that fill our stream of mind stream a lot of it is just really kind of detritus.
Detritus, exactly.
It's it's largely kind of karmic
Flotsam and
detritus.
jetsam.
Karmic detritus.
Yep.
And if we only concentrate on the element of sort of like pitching things overboard, then it's actually problematic.
Yeah.
It's actually problematic. And there's, I think, one of the most fundamental balances is in the amount of time that we spend on actively cultivating things that we find to be more positive, and the time that we spend on identifying things to kind of cut the stream of the karmic regurgitation. because it's not just if we could very skillfully, without being aggressive, without the act of aggression, just let go of the karmic, the negative karmic propensities,
Right.
then something would be possible. But part of our karmic propensity is aggression.
Yes.
So then we will approach this in an aggressive way, and it will just feel like running ourselves through a saw.
Right.
And it will be kind of like that. So I think it's something to be very careful about.
Yes.
And one of the ways we commonly misunderstand meditation is this notion of like thoughts are the enemy. So like all mental formations are the enemy, and it's not true. There are positive mental formations, and so it's actually necessary to encourage that. It's necessary to be able to let go of the momentum of all that which is going on. And that's very important to be able to cultivate that. But there's a freedom in that. It's not a repression. It's not repression. But it's actually a very key point. But there's a point where when all that's in front of us, it's just like I was talking about the biography. We think that ordinary biography is just the story of confusion. Our ordinary biography is the story of our own confusion. When we start to look and say, I'm all confusion. It's actually not true. It's actually not true, but it can look like that. And then we can have this kind of, we're kind of programmed in our culture to have this kind of aggression, this self-destructive denigration and criticism and judgment. And so it's like good then to really concentrate on cultivating the positive and also rejoicing in our positive qualities, spending time really noticing those, and because those are the seeds that will then we can encourage. So really feeling those, that's, I think, very, very important for us.
Well, I want to be respectful of time. It's just a minute after 12. Would it be okay? I guess if you need to leave, that's okay. But if you can stay to do aspirations for Mahamudra, I'd like to close on that. Yeah. Gurus and Yadams, deities of the mandala, Buddhas of the 3 times and 10 directions, and your children, consider me with kindness. Grant your blessing that all my wishes be realized. Sprung from the snow mountain of the pure actions and intentions, mine and those of all sentient beings without limit, may the river of virtue undefiled by the 3 spheres flow into the ocean of the 4 bodies of Buddha. As long as I have not realized this, through all my lifetimes, birth after birth, may not even the words for defilement and suffering be heard, and may I enjoy the prosperity of oceans of happiness and virtue. Having obtained this excellent, free, and well-favored life, along with faith, energy, and intelligence, having attended a worthy master and received the pith of the sacred instructions, may I practice the sacred Dharma properly in all my lives without interruption. The study of scriptures frees one from the veil of ignorance. The contemplation of oral instructions overcomes the darkness of doubt. Light born of meditation illuminates the way things are. May the radiance of the three wisdoms increase. The significance of the ground is the two truths, free from the extremes of eternalism and nihilism. The excellent path, the two accumulations, free from the extremes of assumption and denial. The result obtained is the two benefits, free from the extremes of existence and peace. May I meet the Dharma which is free from error. The ground of refinement is mind itself, indivisible luminosity and emptiness. The refining, the great Vajra composure of Mahamudra. What is to be refined, the incidental stains of confusion. The result of refining, the unstained Dharmakaya, may I realize it. Confidence in outlook is cutting assumptions about the ground. The key to meditation is maintaining that without distraction. The supreme activity is to exercise the sense of meditation in everything. May I have confidence in outlook, meditation, and activity. All dharmas are projections of the mind. As for mind, there is no mind. Mind's nature is empty. Empty and immediate, mind appears as everything. Investigating it well, may I settle the basic points. Appearances which never existed in themselves have been confused as objects. Awareness itself, because of ignorance, has been confused as a self. Through the power of dualistic fixation, I wander in the realm of existence. May ignorance and confusion be completely resolved. It doesn't exist, even Buddhas do not see it. It doesn't not exist, it is the origin of samsara and nirvana. No contradiction, conjunction, the middle way. May I realize the pure being of mind, free of extremes. If one says it is this, nothing has been posited. If one says it is not this, nothing has been denied. Unconditioned pure being transcends intellect. May I gain conviction in the ultimate position. Not realizing it, one circles in the ocean of samsara. Realizing it, Buddha isn't anywhere else. It is everything, it isn't anything, none of this. Pure being, the basis of everything, may I see any misunderstanding here. Since appearance is mind and emptiness is mind, since realization is mind and delusion is mind, since arising is mind and cessation is mind, may all assumptions about mind be eliminated. Unpolluted by meditation with intellectual efforts, undisturbed by the winds of everyday affairs, not manipulating, knowing how to let what is true be itself, may I become skilled in this practice of mind and maintain it. The waves of subtle and coarse thoughts calm down in their own ground. Motionless, the river of mind abides naturally. Free from the contaminations of dullness and torpor, may I establish the still ocean of Shanta. When one looks again and again at the mind which cannot be looked at, and sees vividly for what it is, the meaning of not seeing, doubts about the meaning of is and is not are resolved. Without confusion, may my own face know itself. Looking at objects, there is no object, one sees mind. Looking at mind, there is no mind, it is empty of nature. Looking at both of these, dualistic clinging subsides on its own. May I realize sheer clarity, the way mind is. Free from mental constructions, it is called Mahamudra. Free from extremes, it is called Madhyamaka. Everything complete here, it is also called Mahapati. May I attain the confidence that in understanding one, all are realized. The great bliss of non-attachment is continuous. Sheer clarity without fixations is free of obscurations. Passing beyond intellect, non-thought is naturally present. May these experiences continually arise without effort. Attachment to good and fixation on experience subside on their own. Confusion and evil concepts are cleared away in the realm of ultimate nature. In the ordinary mind, there is no rejection or acceptance, no separation or attainment. May I realize the truth of pure being, complete simplicity. While the nature of beings has always been full enlightenment, not realizing this, they wander in endless samsara. For the boundless suffering of sentient beings, may overwhelming compassion be born in my being. While such compassion is active and immediate, in the moment of compassion, its essential emptiness is nakedly clear. This conjunction is the undeviating supreme path. Inseparable from it, may I meditate day and night. From the power of meditation come eyes and actual knowledge. Sentient beings are ripened and domains of enlightenment refined. Aspirations for the realization of all aspects of Buddhahood are fulfilled. May I complete these three, fulfillment, ripening, and refinement, and become Buddha. By the compassion of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions, and the power of whatever pure virtue there may be, may my wishes and those of all beings be fulfilled as we ask in this way. Let's just briefly dedicate the merit. By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
Where'd the folder go?
Did you find these? I don't know where they were.
They go on the extreme left.
Thank you very much.